Beneath the sunny streets of downtown Los Angeles stands a hotel with a history darker than its walls let on. A place where stories vanish, guests disappear, and legends are born in whispers. This isn't just a building with a past, it's a trap with a memory. Tonight, we descend into the haunting corridors of the Cecil Hotel, where not everyone checks out. The first thing you notice about the Cecil Hotel isn't the building, it's the feeling. Even before the lobby doors creak open, something presses against your chest. Not heavy. Not quite. Just aware. As if the hotel knows you're there. The lights flicker overhead. Not from age, you think, but resistance. Like they don't want to stay on too long. It's 10:06 p.m. You sign the guest book. Name, Thomas Finch. Purpose of visit, quiet. The woman at the front desk doesn't smile. Her name tag says, Lorraine, but it might as well say don't ask. She gives you a room key. Not a card. A real key, worn brass, faded numbers. Room 908. As you make your way up, the elevator moans between floors. The buttons light too slowly. You press 9 twice just to be sure. Something about the mirrored walls makes you look down instead of at your reflection. The hallway on the 9th floor is long, narrow, and smells faintly of bleach and mildew. The carpeting is patterned, dizzying. The overhead light flickers. Once, twice, and then holds steady. You reach your door. Insert the key. Click. Inside, the room is small. Bed. Lamp. TV that doesn't work. A window overlooking nothing, just brick wall. The air conditioner hums even when turned off. You sit on the edge of the bed and feel it again. That presence. From the hallway, something scrapes. Something long and dry. You check the peephole. Nothing. But you're not alone here. Not really. Not in the Cecil Hotel. Thomas couldn't sleep. The room wasn't loud, just active. Pipes hissed softly behind the walls, like whispers heard underwater. The old TV, despite being unplugged, clicked once every few minutes. Not loud. Just enough. He got up to inspect the corners. Just nerves, he thought. Or maybe the weight of the place. The Cecil wasn't just old, it felt used up. The wallpaper curled slightly at the baseboards. He reached down, peeled a corner back. Something had been scratched into the plaster underneath. Not a drawing. A date. February 19th, 13. He froze. He knew that date. Everyone who'd ever heard of the Cecil did. It was the day they found Elisa Lam's body in the water tank. The case had gone viral, videos, theories, conspiracies. She'd vanished for weeks. The elevator footage showed her acting erratically, talking to nothing, pressing every button in the panel. Then she was just gone. Until guests complained of foul-tasting water. They found her on the roof. Inside the sealed tank. No explanation. He ran his fingers over the scratched numbers. Someone had left them here, intentionally. Carved with something sharp, over and over, until the paint gave way. Behind him, the bathroom light flickered on. He hadn't touched the switch. The tap began to run. Slow. Dark. He stepped toward it, and then froze. On the steamed-up mirror, something had written. Stay out of the water. Thomas wiped the mirror clean. Nothing was there. No words. Just his face, drawn, tired, and slightly paler than he remembered. He turned the tap off. The water had run dark brown, nearly black. But now it was clear again, as if daring him to trust it. He didn't. Back in bed, he tried to Google the hotel again. Maybe there were renovations recently. Maybe some explanation. But the Wi-Fi wouldn't connect. The clock read 2:44 a.m. And then the sound came again, the scrape. Closer now. Down the hall. Rhythmic. Measured. As if something were being dragged across the carpet. Something unwilling. He cracked the door open. The hallway was empty. But the elevator at the far end dinged. Once. The doors opened. No one inside. He watched for a beat too long, and then stepped into the corridor. The elevator sat like a waiting mouth. Inside, the mirror reflected nothing but the opposite wall. Not him. Not the hallway. He stepped in anyway. Pressed floor 1. Nothing. Pressed 3. Still nothing. Then he remembered the rumors, half myth, half game, the elevator ritual. They said if you pushed the floors in a specific order, you'd be taken to another world. He didn't believe it. But his fingers moved anyway. 4, 2, 6, 2, 10. The elevator jolted. Began to descend. But it never stopped on any of the floors. And when the doors opened, the hallway waiting beyond wasn't the 9th floor. It wasn't any floor. And he definitely wasn't supposed to be there. The hallway beyond the elevator was dim and silent. No numbers on the doors. No buzzing lights. Just gray walls and carpet soaked a shade too dark to be dust. Thomas stepped out. Behind him, the elevator doors slid shut without a sound. He tried to press the call button. Nothing. There were no buttons at all. No fire exit. No signs. Only doors. Identical. Unmarked. Closed. He walked carefully, trying to ignore the rising chill in his chest. The walls felt too close. The air was stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. One of the doors had a smear of something dark near the base. Another had deep gouges, as if someone had clawed it from the inside. As he reached for the third door on the left, he heard it. A faint, wet cough. Coming from behind one of the doors to his right. He didn't move. Didn't breathe. The cough came again, closer this time. And then, a click. A doorknob turning. He turned and ran. Down the hall, around the corner. But it didn't end. The hallway kept going. Doors multiplying. Lights flickering to life overhead as if illuminating his panic. He stopped when he saw it. A single elevator at the far end. The call button glowing a dull red. He slammed the button. Waited. Turned back. And one of the doors was open now. Just a crack. From the dark inside, a voice whispered. "You're already in the water." Thomas dove into the elevator. The doors didn't close. He jabbed the button over and over, sweat prickling down his spine. Behind him, the open door down the hall widened slowly, like a mouth adjusting to a new smile. Finally, ding. The doors shut. The elevator lurched upward. He didn't press a floor. It just moved. When the doors opened again, it wasn't the 9th floor. But it wasn't the basement either. It was the lobby. Except, not quite. The desk was in the wrong place. The light was greenish, like aquarium glass. And the woman behind the counter wasn't Lorraine. This one didn't blink. Didn't move. Just watched him. "Checking out?" she asked, her voice like something underwater. "No," Thomas said slowly. "Wrong floor." Her head tilted, but the eyes didn't follow. "Everyone says that." He turned to get back in the elevator, but it was gone. Not closed. Not broken. Gone. Just a blank wall where it used to be. Behind him, the desk bell rang. But he hadn't touched it. He turned. A puddle had begun to spread across the lobby floor from beneath the desk. Not water, thicker. Black. Moving like it had somewhere to go. The receptionist still hadn't blinked. "Sometimes the Cecil doesn't let people leave," she said. "And sometimes." She smiled slowly. "They don't even remember checking in." Thomas backed away from the desk, careful not to let the black puddle touch his shoes. It crept across the tiled floor like oil chasing downhill. He turned and ran through the lobby. The revolving doors were just ahead, but something was wrong. Outside was pitch black, as if the city had vanished. No streetlights, no traffic, no neon hum of downtown LA. Just darkness. He pushed through the doors anyway. And found himself, in a hallway. 9th floor. Room 908 right in front of him. He hadn't touched an elevator. Hadn't even turned around. He was just back. The door creaked open before he could reach for it. And inside, the room was no longer the same. There was someone sitting on the bed. Back turned. Motionless. Thomas froze. "Hello?" No response. He inched closer. The figure was damp. Clothes clung to skin as if freshly pulled from water. Hair hung in wet strands down their back. Water pooled beneath their feet, dripping steadily from unseen wounds. He moved closer still. The figure turned slightly. A single, bloated eye rolled in his direction. "Elisa." He staggered back, breath catching in his throat. But no, it wasn't her. Not exactly. The face was wrong. Parts missing. Lips sewn shut. And she wasn't alone. From the bathroom, another wet shape crawled out, dragging a ruined arm behind it. Then another, emerging from the closet. Each one silent, soaked, and broken. These were the ones the Cecil hadn't let leave. And they were waking up. Thomas slammed the door and stumbled backward into the hallway, heart pounding like fists on concrete. He didn't look back. Didn't want to see if they were following. But he could hear it, the wet shuffle of dragging limbs. The steady drip of water on old carpet. He turned and ran down the corridor, past room after room. Every door he passed seemed to twitch, like it wanted to open. Like someone, or something, was listening on the other side. When he reached the stairwell, he didn't hesitate. He bolted down. 9th floor. 8th. 7th. Each flight more warped than the last. By the 5th floor, the stairwell had become narrow and damp, as if the walls were sweating. The steps squished beneath his feet. He could hear faint whispers echoing through the concrete, though he couldn't make out the words. He stopped to catch his breath. And there, on the landing wall, written in what looked like black mold, were the words. "They swim through the walls." Then. A thud. Below him. Something was climbing up. Not fast. Not loud. But relentless. A hand slapped the railing below, webbed and pale. Thomas turned to run again, only to stop cold. On the landing above him, a woman stood barefoot in a tattered red dress. Her eyes were milk white. Her face, frozen in a scream. But no sound came. Not from her mouth. Just from the walls around her. Screaming. Thomas pressed himself against the stairwell as the woman in red stood still, blocking the only path up. Her mouth gaped in a voiceless howl, yet the sound poured from everywhere else, vibrating in the railings, echoing through the cement, rattling the light fixtures overhead. The walls screamed for her. The force of it bent reality. He felt it behind his eyes, in his teeth. Like sound made solid. The woman didn't move, but her head slowly tilted toward him. Not in curiosity. In recognition. Thomas turned, bolted down the stairs, 3 steps at a time, until the stairwell opened into a floor he didn't recognize. The sign read, 14, but the Cecil was only 14 stories tall, and the rooftop was already accounted for. This wasn't the top. It was lower. Impossible. The hallway was long and sickly yellow. Fluorescent lights buzzed like flies. Doors here weren't numbered. Just marked with scratches, duct tape, and, in one case, a child's drawing of a stick figure holding hands with something huge and black. The smell hit next. Not rot. Rust. Like dried blood on old metal. Then came the voice. Not a whisper this time. A full, calm voice coming from behind the nearest door. Male. Familiar. Thomas. You're early. His mouth dried. He had told no one he was coming here. Hadn't even said it out loud. So how did the voice know his name? How did it sound like him? Thomas stared at the door. The voice that had called his name wasn't distorted. It didn't echo. It sounded right. Grounded. Measured. Like he was hearing a recording of himself from an old voicemail. He stepped back. The door rattled. Not violently, like it was knocking from the inside. A pause. Then. You left me here. Don't you remember? His mouth went dry. He didn't answer. Let me out, Thomas. I've been so cold. He turned and walked away quickly, heart hammering in his throat. The hallway lights flickered in slow sync with his footsteps, casting his shadow long and twitching against the walls. Then something caught his attention. At the end of the hall, a TV screen glowed behind a cracked door. The sound. Static, layered with something beneath. Almost like whispering. He pushed the door open. Inside was a room like his, but aged 30 years. Wallpaper peeling. Furniture covered in sheets. On the TV, grainy footage played on loop. It was elevator security footage. He recognized it instantly. Elisa Lam. Frozen in grainy black and white, pressing buttons, stepping in and out of the elevator. Moving like she was speaking to someone who wasn't there. Her face twisted in fear. He stepped closer to the screen. And saw something new. Himself. For a split second, barely more than a flicker, his face appeared just behind her in the frame. Watching. Smiling. Thomas stumbled backward, eyes locked on the flickering screen. There, again. A flash. Frame by frame. His own face, unmistakable, lingering just inside the elevator doors behind Elisa Lam. Except. He had never been there. Never even visited LA before this trip. He scrubbed through the footage with trembling fingers on the old VCR dial. Every loop was different now. In one, he saw himself turn to the camera and wink. In another, he stood motionless, mouth moving as if counting. In each version, Elisa grew more frantic, while he remained calm. Wrong. He grabbed the remote, yanked the tape out. But the TV didn't shut off. The screen turned black, until a live feed appeared. A shot of room 908's door. His door. Down the hallway. A timestamp flickered in the corner. Now. Thomas looked over his shoulder. The door to the hallway was still open. On the screen, the hallway remained empty, until something moved. A figure rounded the corner. Him. But not him. Its eyes were too wide. Its jaw hung too loose. And its arms dangled slightly longer than they should have. It stopped in front of room 908. Tilted its head. Then turned to face the camera directly. And smiled. The lights in the room dimmed. On the wall behind the TV, water began to seep down from the ceiling. It spelled a single word. Stay. Thomas backed out of the room, heart pounding. The air in the hallway felt heavier now, dense with something humid and old. Every light overhead flickered slightly off-beat, like the hotel itself was breathing. He needed to leave. Find stairs. A window. Anything. But the hallway behind him had changed. It was shorter. No door to the stairwell. No fire escape map. Just a wall covered in yellowed, water-warped wallpaper. He reached for his phone. No service. Not even a clock. Just 2:44 a.m., frozen like it had been for hours. Thomas walked back toward room 908. And stopped. The door was open. Inside, the lights were off, but the mirror above the dresser glowed faintly. Pale blue, like the light you see before waking up from a nightmare. He stepped inside. The room was empty. But the mirror wasn't. His reflection stared back, but it didn't copy his movements. When he stepped left, it leaned forward. When he stopped breathing, it smiled. It mouthed a word. Over and over. Welcome. Behind the mirror, something tapped, 3 soft knocks, like fingernails on glass. Then the reflection stepped forward, its hands pressed flat against the other side. It wasn't a mirror anymore. It was glass. And Thomas was no longer certain he was on the right side. Thomas stumbled away from the mirror, his own reflection still staring, still smiling, still moving even after he had stopped. The thing behind the glass placed a palm against the surface. The hand was damp. Wrinkled. The fingertips left smudges that trailed downward like tears. Then it whispered, voice muffled as though underwater. Switch. Thomas turned toward the hallway. He needed to leave. Now. But the hallway was gone. The room had expanded. It no longer ended in walls, but corridors that branched off in impossible directions. The door behind him was gone entirely, replaced by a stretch of pale, flickering light. He turned back to the mirror. His reflection was gone. In its place was someone else. A young man, early 20s, hair cropped short. Soaked. Eyes wide. Mouth twitching as though trying to scream but unable to open. Thomas recognized him. He'd seen him once, buried in old forum posts and unsolved mysteries. Jack Unterweger's last victim? No. Worse. One of the forgotten ones, those who checked in and never made headlines. Never made it out. Trapped here. Now watching him. Behind the man, dozens of other figures began to appear, one by one. All soaked. All silent. Pressed to the other side of the mirror like moths to a window at night. Thomas backed away. He tripped on the bed and hit the floor hard, head spinning. And from somewhere deeper in the mirror world, a voice called. This place remembers everyone. Thomas sat up slowly. The room was still warped, stretched with impossible angles and doorways that hadn't been there before. But the mirror had gone dark. Just a smooth pane of black glass now, reflecting nothing at all, not even him. He stood, heart thudding. From somewhere deeper within the new corridor, a light flickered, distant, yellow, like an old exit sign struggling to stay lit. Drawn by the instinct to escape, he stepped forward. The floor beneath his feet felt spongy. Damp. Each step gave slightly, like walking across soaked carpet left too long in the dark. He passed rooms now, each door slightly ajar. Inside, shadows moved, but never fully emerged. He didn't dare look in. Not yet. Eventually, he came to a door that stood shut and solid. Burned into the wood, not carved or painted, was the number. 1432. But he knew the Cecil had no 14th floor. Just like it had no room 1432. And yet, here it was. The doorknob felt cold. He turned it. Inside, the room looked pristine. White sheets. Fresh towels. Television humming faint static. A guest book sat on the table by the bed. He flipped it open. Names filled every line, some scribbled in panic, some barely legible. But many were familiar. Too familiar. Names he had seen online. Names from podcasts. Reddit threads. Cold case files. And at the bottom, still wet with ink. Thomas Finch. He hadn't written it. He dropped the book. The TV flashed. And on the screen, once again, he saw himself. Only this time, he wasn't watching. He was being watched. The screen crackled, then cleared. Thomas sat frozen on the edge of the bed, watching his own image blink into focus. But it wasn't a recording. It was live. His face stared back at him, expressionless, eyes hollow. Behind his image, the background was all wrong. Not the room he was in, but something older. Damaged. The walls were stained, the bed was torn. Mold crawled across the ceiling like veins. He leaned forward. The other him leaned back. Not mirrored. Not opposite. Independent. It raised its hand slowly and traced a finger down its cheek. A deep gouge appeared there, flesh parting with no pain. Blood didn't flow, it oozed like black ink. Thomas's own cheek began to sting. He touched it. Dry. But when he looked down, a smear of ink-black blood was on his fingertips. The screen flickered again. Now the room on the screen was room 908. His original room. Someone stood at the window, their back turned. The TV zoomed in on its own, no remote in sight. The figure turned, bit by bit, until its face came into view. It was Elisa Lamb. But her eyes were solid black. And as the screen crackled, her voice emerged, garbled, submerged in static. They drink what we leave behind. The feed cut. The lights in the room popped, first one, then all. And in the sudden dark, Thomas heard movement. From beneath the bed. From inside the closet. From behind the mirror. Something was in there with him. And it remembered everything. Thomas didn't move. He barely breathed. The silence after the TV shut off felt deeper than before, intentional. Like the room itself was holding its breath with him. Then. A soft tap. From under the bed. Followed by a slow, deliberate dragging sound. He backed toward the door, but the knob refused to turn. The floor pulsed beneath him. Another noise. Breathing. From inside the closet now. Heavy. Wet. The mirror buzzed faintly as if it were turning on, though no light came from it. Just a low-frequency hum, the kind that vibrated behind the teeth and beneath the ribs. Then something spoke. Not aloud. Inside his head. You saw her. And now they see you. The closet door creaked open, though he hadn't touched it. Inside hung nothing but shadows. But two pale feet emerged, swinging slightly from above, as though someone were hanging just out of sight. But the ceiling wasn't tall enough for that. He stepped back toward the bed. That's when a hand reached out from beneath it, pale, bloated, fingers curled in a way that reminded him of someone long drowned. It grabbed his ankle. He kicked free, fell back, scrambled to the dresser. He grabbed the guest book and hurled it at the mirror. It shattered. But behind the broken glass, was not a wall. There was a room. Another hotel room. And standing in it, staring at him through the jagged hole, was himself again. But smiling wider this time. As if he was finally ready. The glass crunched beneath Thomas's shoes as he stepped closer to the shattered mirror. Through the jagged opening, the other room remained still, impossibly identical to his own, yet reversed, skewed like a reflection drawn from memory instead of fact. Inside, his double stood just a few feet away. Same face. Same clothes. Same tired eyes. But the expression was all wrong. It grinned as if the skin had forgotten how to stretch naturally. The teeth were too long. Too even. Almost deliberate. Thomas hesitated, until the sound behind him returned. A low squelch from under the bed. A dragging breath from the closet. The room itself was closing in again. He stepped through the mirror. The sensation was instant, like slipping beneath the surface of icy water. His ears popped. The hum vanished. He stood in the reverse room now, cold and perfectly still. The other him was gone. Vanished. The bed here was clean. The light steady. The mirror on the far wall flawless. He looked around, confused. Had he escaped? Then he noticed the walls. Lined with photos. Black and white headshots. Dozens of them. All with names written beneath. Faded. Some he recognized, unsolved cases, missing persons, hotel guests who'd vanished over the years. He searched for his own. It wasn't there. Until he saw the empty frame. A small brass plate beneath it read, Thomas Finch, in progress. Then, behind him, the mirror on the far wall began to ripple. And something started to push through. Not a person. Not himself. Something older. The mirror rippled like disturbed water, distorting the image of the room behind it. Then fingers emerged, long, jointless, slick with something dark. Not glass anymore. Not even a barrier. Just a threshold. Thomas backed away as a shape pushed through, head first. It was faceless. Where a face should have been was a featureless smear, like wax melted smooth. But Thomas could feel its gaze. It burned across his skin like static. The thing dragged itself into the room soundlessly. Its arms bent wrong. Its body shifted like it didn't belong in this dimension, as though something had folded it the wrong way before shoving it in. It opened its mouth, if it could be called that. And Thomas's own voice came out. They all watch. That's what keeps them alive. Behind him, the door to the hallway burst open. More of them waited outside. Thin, wet figures with blank eyes and hollow mouths. Each wearing remnants of hotel robes, bellhop jackets, and guest clothes decades out of date. They didn't advance. Just watched. The faceless one tilted its head. Its voice, still Thomas's, whispered. You've seen what you weren't meant to. That means you belong to it now. To us. Thomas lunged for the only thing in reach, a shard of broken mirror. He held it up, not as a weapon, but as a window. In its reflection, all the figures behind him were gone. But the faceless one remained. Only now, it had his face. Thomas ran. Past the mirror, past the watchers in the hallway who no longer tried to hide. They didn't chase. They didn't need to. The Cecil always brought people back. Corridors twisted around him, never quite ending. Every turn should have led to the lobby or stairwell, but instead, he reached a door unlike the others. Unlabeled. Metal. Cold. He pushed it open and stepped into an archive. Rows and rows of filing cabinets stretched in every direction. Floor to ceiling. Each one labeled with names and dates, some decades old, others from yesterday. The room buzzed faintly, like an electrical substation. At the center, a desk. At the desk, a man. Pale skin. Eyes like clouded glass. Wearing a faded Cecil Hotel bellhop uniform. He didn't speak. Just gestured to a single file resting on the desk, already open. Thomas Finch. Thomas approached, hesitating before reading. Inside were details no one should know, childhood memories, private thoughts, moments he'd never spoken aloud. Photos of him in the lobby. In the hallway. Sleeping in room 908. One page stood out. A list. Check-in, 9:16 p.m. First encounter, 2:44 a.m. Ritual contact, complete. Absorption, pending. He looked up. The bellhop was gone. The desk too. He stood alone in a room with thousands of files, and all of them began to rattle. One by one, drawers slid open. And from the darkness inside each drawer, something began to crawl out. The drawers yawned open like mouths. And the things that emerged from them weren't human. At first glance, they looked like people, but their bodies were folded. Thin, creased like origami. Made entirely of brittle paper and faded ink. Faces scribbled hastily in pencil, each one flickering between emotionless and terrified. They moved in unison. Silent. Crackling. One stepped forward, its chest opening like a book. Inside were documents, printed on itself, arrest records, obituaries, psychiatric notes. Someone's life, summarized and stored within its flesh. Thomas backed away, but the floor had changed beneath him. Each tile was now a page. Each step rewritten history. And he was standing on his own file. His own page. The words beneath his shoes shifted with every heartbeat. Finch, Thomas, status, incomplete, awaiting final entry. The paper people surrounded him now. They didn't touch. They watched. Like every other thing in this place. One reached out, unrolling a scroll-like arm. On it, a passage scrawled in charcoal. You can leave, Thomas. But something must stay behind. He shook his head, mouth dry. What do you mean? The figure turned, revealing a second line written across its back. Your name. Your face. Your place. And then it stepped aside. Behind it, a single exit door. The only one. With a brass plaque nailed to its frame. Checkout. Thomas hesitated. If he left, who would he be afterward? Thomas stood before the door marked checkout, the brass plaque gleaming like a trick of the eye. The paper-thin watchers parted just enough for him to approach, but not enough to forget they were there. Still staring. Still waiting. He reached for the handle. It was cold, colder than anything in the hotel had been. The metal almost burned. The moment his fingers touched it, the room went still. Then a voice spoke. Not from a person, not even from a direction. It came from everywhere. What will you leave behind? Thomas swallowed hard. The watchers began to unfold, literally. Their faces peeled open into cascading flaps of paper, revealing other lives underneath. Beneath each face was another. Beneath each name, another identity. All of them had once been someone. Until they checked out. Thomas understood. To leave meant more than escaping the hotel. It meant replacing something. A sacrifice. A story. A self. He pulled the door open. Behind it was not a hallway. Not a street. Just darkness, soft and whispering. Filled with names he couldn't quite hear. The floor creaked behind him. His reflection stepped through the archive doorway. Still smiling. Still wearing his face. It whispered. You leave. I stay. But I become what they remember. Thomas blinked. The reflection took his place beside the paper-thin figures. They welcomed it. As for him, he stepped through the door. Light. Harsh and white. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed above him as Thomas stumbled into a modern, sterile lobby. Clean tile floors. Crisp signage. A digital clock on the wall read 7:13 a.m. Morning. Real morning. He stood in the entranceway of the Cecil Hotel. But, not that Cecil. This lobby was remodeled. No receptionist in sight. No dusty couches. Just a self-check-in kiosk and a rack of brochures advertising Hollywood tours and rooftop yoga. Tourists milled about, none of them aware of what this place had been. What it still was. Thomas stepped outside. The sun stung his eyes. Downtown LA buzzed with the normal chaos of early traffic. Sirens in the distance. The smell of hot concrete and breakfast carts. He stood there, dazed, trying to piece together how much time had passed. No one looked at him twice. He fumbled for his phone. Full signal. The date flashed on the screen. August 25th. But he'd only checked in on the 22nd. 3 days. Just like the legend said. He looked at the glass doors behind him. His reflection stared back, neutral, calm. But something in the expression was off. His own eyes didn't blink when he did. He reached up, touched his face. For a second, he swore it felt wrong, like skin stretched too tightly over a mask. His phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. Welcome back, Thomas. Thank you for your stay. Your story has been filed. He dropped the phone. And behind him, reflected in the glass. The bellhop watched. Thomas didn't sleep that night. Even back in his apartment across the city, the shadows moved differently. Corners of his home stayed dark too long. Reflections shimmered a second after he'd moved on. He avoided mirrors. And phones. And the news. But he couldn't avoid the dreams. They always began the same, the elevator doors creaking open to a floor that didn't exist. The hallway drenched in water. The sound of something dragging just beyond sight. And then the reflection, that thing that now walked in his skin, would speak. You left the building. Not the hotel. On the 4th night, he tried to go back. He needed to see the lobby again. Prove to himself that it was just a hotel. That he hadn't traded something essential. That he was still him. But when he arrived, the Cecil was gone. In its place was a construction site. The lot had been leveled. All that remained was rubble behind a chain-link fence. A paper sign flapped in the wind. Demolition complete, August 23rd. One day after he had entered, he asked a nearby worker about it. The man squinted, confused. Cecil? Nah, that place has been gone for years. No one's used that name since before COVID. Thomas's blood ran cold. But I was just there. Room 908. I stayed. The worker shook his head. There was number 908. That floor didn't exist. Building only went to 6. Behind him, on the edge of the rubble, a mirror fragment glinted in the sunlight. And in it, Thomas didn't blink. Back in his apartment, Thomas began to document everything, dates, times, memories. Trying to prove something. Trying to map out what was real and what had changed. But the more he wrote, the more the pages seemed to alter themselves. He'd return to a note that read, checked in at 9:16 p.m., and find it now said. Check-in status, finalized. Photographs on his phone were the same, until they weren't. One selfie in front of room 908 began showing someone else in the background. A figure, distorted by water, smiling faintly behind the doorframe. Another showed him sleeping. He'd never taken that. He stopped using the phone entirely. Every screen flickered when he passed. His own reflection lagged behind. Eventually, people noticed. Friends asked what was wrong. Co-workers said he looked tired, then stopped saying anything at all. Like something about him now discouraged remembering. One night, he caught a glimpse of himself in the black surface of a turned-off TV. And for just a moment, it blinked. But he hadn't. Then it leaned forward, inside the screen. Smiling. Thomas hurled the remote, shattering the glass. But when he looked again, his apartment was gone. He stood in the Cecil's hallway. Room 908 in front of him. A fresh newspaper lay on the floor. The headline read, "Missing tourist case reopened, body never recovered." The photo underneath? Him. Still smiling. Still in room 908. Thomas stared at the newspaper. The image stared back. His own face frozen in grayscale. A face the world now considered missing. And yet, here he stood. Awake. Breathing. But the hallway around him had changed. Again. The wallpaper pulsed gently, like skin stretched over something alive. The lights overhead buzzed in rhythmic patterns, flickering in Morse code he didn't understand. Room 908's door opened without a sound. No key. No knock. No invitation. Inside, the room was identical to the first time he'd entered, but cleaner. Restored. As if it had been waiting for his return. There was a note on the nightstand. No envelope. Just a folded slip of paper. The stay never ends. Only your awareness does. He looked to the mirror. It no longer reflected the room, only darkness, shifting in deep. Then the door shut behind him. Click. Thomas turned and pulled the knob. It wouldn't budge. The lock twisted itself into place, rusted and final. Panic flared in his chest. He turned to the window. But it didn't show the city. Just his own back. A camera's eye view. The room was being watched. Filmed. He was part of the footage now. The next viral mystery. The next unexplained event on forums, podcasts, YouTube breakdowns. A story with no ending. A guest with no checkout. He moved to the bed, heart pounding. On the sheets lay a guest book. The first page already filled. With his handwriting. And a signature. But he didn't remember writing it. Thomas stared at the signature. It was his, down to the slight upward curl on the T, the subtle hesitation in the H. Perfect. But he had never written it. Not here. Not yet. Beneath it, in faint, crimson ink, another line appeared as he watched. Entry complete. Loop secured. The room grew colder. From the ceiling above, the light dimmed to a pulsing red glow, and the air filled with that same low hum he remembered from the mirror room, a sound that didn't belong to this world. Thomas stumbled back from the bed. The mirror on the far wall shimmered. Then played footage. Not from outside. Not of the hallway. But of him. Moments ago. Standing exactly where he stood now, staring at the book. Except this version of him began to speak. "You'll do it again," the image whispered. "You already have. You always will." The Thomas in the mirror turned his head slowly, staring directly at him. "That's the deal. You stay, we record. They forget, and you fade." The screen cut out. The room fell into darkness. He moved to the door again. It still wouldn't open. Then he noticed the doorknob had changed. It wasn't brass anymore. It was bone. A thin, polished section of vertebrae, cool and dry to the touch. He looked down at his hands, his skin was losing color, becoming papery, gray, almost translucent. His name began to fade from his own mind. He whispered it aloud to hold on to it. Thomas Finch. But the mirror, flickering back to life, displayed a new name underneath his face. Guest number 521, claimed. The word echoed through the room without sound. Claimed. As if something had stamped it onto his soul. He could feel it, like a weight tethered to the back of his thoughts, pulling at his identity. Thomas backed away from the mirror. His face on the screen remained locked in a dead stare, unblinking, almost bored. From the ceiling above, a slow creaking started. Like rope strained under weight. He looked up, expecting to see the pale feet again. But this time, there was only the outline of a trapdoor. It hadn't been there before. It swung open with a hiss, revealing a ladder. A draft of cold air spilled down, carrying the faint scent of mildew and rot. He knew what he was supposed to do. He climbed. Each rung felt older than the last, slick with condensation, groaning under his weight. When he reached the top, the attic was pitch black. Then, click. A single bare light bulb buzzed to life. And there they were. Hundreds of guest books, stacked in columns, each labeled by decade. Some handwritten. Others burned. Some bound in stitched leather, others in human skin, or something disturbingly like it. Thomas approached the nearest one. It flipped open on its own. Inside, a photo of him. Below it, his room number, check-in date, and a line of coded symbols. And beside it, a key. Room 1432. The one that shouldn't exist. The book slammed shut. The lights went out. In the dark, a whisper curled around him, ancient and patient. You were never the first. You will not be the last. The attic groaned beneath him, as if the weight of every name stored within pressed down on his bones. In the pitch dark, Thomas felt the key in his hand, cold, jagged, far too heavy for its size. Etched into the handle was the number 1432, though the surface seemed to shimmer with age and erosion, like it had existed far longer than the hotel itself. He descended the ladder, step by step, the cold air tightening around his lungs. When he reached the floor again, the hallway was gone. In its place, a single stretch of corridor. Infinite and perfectly straight. At the end, room 1432. He walked toward it, and the hotel changed around him. The walls flickered between eras, 1920s wallpaper, 1960s carpeting, 1980s graffiti, all melting into each other like oil on water. Time meant nothing here. He stood before the door. It was made of iron, stained black with something that wasn't rust. The keyhole pulsed faintly. He inserted the key. A breath, not his own, escaped from the other side. The door clicked. And opened. Inside was, himself. Older. Broken. Kneeling on the floor, surrounded by mirrors. His hair gone gray, his eyes hollow, his hands shaking as he scribbled names onto a guest ledger that never seemed to fill. He didn't look up. He simply said, "Don't let them make you the next archivist." Thomas stepped back. But the door behind him slammed shut. Locks clicked into place. And all around him, the mirrors began to whisper. The mirrors whispered in overlapping voices. Young and old, men and women, some weeping, others laughing faintly through cracked, bloodless lips. Stay. Replace. Remember for us. Each mirror showed a version of Thomas, each one distorted by time, by choices he hadn't made yet. In one, he saw himself sitting calmly, writing names just like the man on the floor. In another, he was pacing frantically, bleeding from his ears, begging silently for release. The older version finally looked up. His eyes weren't just hollow. They were missing. Two black holes where sight had once been. "This is what happens when no one leaves," he whispered. "They turn you into memory. A vessel for everyone else who couldn't make it out." Thomas pressed his hands to the cold glass of one mirror. His reflection didn't move. Instead, it whispered, "You should have let the other you stay." Thomas turned back toward the door, but it was gone again. The room was gone. Now he stood in a lobby. Familiar but wrong. The walls bled into static. The front desk was unattended. Above the check-in ledger, a sign now read, "Welcome to the Cecil, memory rate guaranteed." He stepped forward, trying to scream, but no sound came out. From every wall, the faces in the mirrors watched. Each one a guest. Each one trapped. The elevator dinged behind him. The doors opened. Inside stood the reflection, the other Thomas. Smiling. Calm. It gestured. "Your room is ready." Thomas didn't want to move. But his legs did. Each step toward the elevator felt like a betrayal, like his body no longer belonged entirely to him. The reflection inside waited patiently, hands folded like a polite concierge. Thomas crossed the threshold. The doors shut. No buttons. No panel. Just a small brass plaque above the door. One way only. The elevator began to descend, not rise. And the hum, it returned. That low, thrumming vibration that tunneled into bone. The reflection beside him turned, still smiling, and said, "You're not checking in. You're being remembered." The walls of the elevator began to shift, becoming mirrors. Dozens of them. Each showing a different room. Different Thomas figures. All trapped. Some screaming. Some silent. Some just curled up, repeating their names over and over like a prayer. The elevator slowed. Stopped. The doors slid open into blackness. But Thomas saw outlines, endless rows of beds, mirrors, and filing cabinets that stretched into eternity. The archivist's domain. The final layer of the Cecil. A bell rang once. Ding. The other Thomas stepped out and turned to him. "Someone must stay," he said, voice no longer just human. "Someone must remember." That's how the hotel survives. Thomas stood paralyzed as invisible hands began to pull at him. Tugging gently. Kindly. Like undertakers. His voice came at last, a whisper choked in disbelief. "But I left." The reflection smiled. "No, Thomas. You only thought you did." Somewhere above, the city continued its hum. Cars rolled by. Tourists snapped photos. The new tenants of the rebranded hotel slept soundly in rooms that looked nothing like they had in 1947, or 1964, or 2013. But beneath it all, the true Cecil still existed. And Thomas had become part of it. He sat in a room with no walls, no ceiling, no floor. Just memory, layered and looping, like magnetic tape. Every so often, he could hear a bell ring. Ding. Another guest arriving. Or leaving. Or believing they had left. He tried to scream, but the sound didn't work here. Instead, his breath came out in typed letters on the wall beside him. The script of a guest book being written in real time. Sometimes, he could see through a mirror. Not his own, but someone else's, another visitor. Another poor soul who'd gotten too curious. Touched too many rumors. Booked a room on a whim. He tried to warn them. But his reflection would only smile. It always smiled now. He began to forget how long he'd been here. His name came slower each time. Thomas Finch. Was that it? The name began to blur into the paper. Eventually, it became a file. Then an image. Then a myth. Remember the guy who went missing after staying one night? Yeah, they say he's part of the hotel now. They say you can see him in the mirror if you book room 908. The lights flickered once more. The archivist turned a page. And a new name appeared. Some say the Cecil is just an old hotel, its stories exaggerated by ghost hunters and internet sleuths. But if walls remember, if shadows linger, and if a name can vanish into a guest book with no end, then maybe it's not just legend. Maybe it's waiting. And if you ever find yourself in front of room 908, don't look in the mirror. Thank you for watching. And remember, subscribe for more stories you'll wish you hadn't heard before bedtime.